Are Deming's principles still embraced by U.S. organizations?
Plus, do you lead like you drive? We'll find out when we come back.
Today's sponsor of Quality Digest Live is Hexagon Metrology. Hexagon carries the widest range of quality brands. With an extensive support network, Hexagon is also your partner. Hexagon Metrology. We are metrology.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for July 18th, 2014. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. Well, okay, so for the latest update in consumer 3D printing.
We need something for this. 3D news.
Well,
maybe that was it.
We'll have
maybe
it printed out,
right
and we'll have it printed out in 3D.
We'll hold it up back here. That'd be cool.
Well, you may have heard the name MakerBot. MakerBot's been around a while. They make relatively inexpensive 3D printers. Well, they have teamed with Home Depot in a pilot program to demo the MakerBot Replicator 3D printer in select Home Depots in California, New York, and Illinois. According to MakerBot's website, MakerBot CEO Bray Pettis said, "Imagine a world where you can 3D print replacement parts and use 3D printing as an integral part of design and building work." So if you think about it, it kind of makes sense for them to team up with Home Depot. Home Depot is a do-it-yourself kind of organization, and MakerBot has make it yourself, MIY as they call it. So it kind of makes sense, this partnership, to kind of see what happens, pilot program, see what happens. If you think about it, making replacement parts has actually been a useful application of 3D printer hobbyists for several years, with people sharing CAD drawings of hard to get parts with other 3D printer hobbyists. So really what we're seeing here is kind of a migration from a kind of underground or grassroots make-it-yourself group to a more mass market system, which would allow anyone to create their own replacement parts, as long as they can shell out for the cost of the printers. Home Depot is selling several MakerBot models. In fact, if you go on the Home Depot site, they are selling 3D printers. There's a couple of them right there. I think that's that might be the mini on the left. So we got, what are they selling? They're selling the Replicator Mini 3D printer, the Replicator 2 Desktop 3D printer, that was the larger one, the Replicator Desktop 3D printer, and the Digitizer Desktop 3D scanner. Printer prices are going to range from $1,375, that's $1,375, to $2,899, $2,899. They have a little scanner that sells for about $800. That said, you don't necessarily have to buy a printer. We are seeing more and more 3D printing as a service showing up. Companies like Sculpteo, for instance, are doing 3D printing as a service, and I think there's some other ones out there as well. So if you do need to, if you happen to have your drawing in a, maybe as an STL file or a CAD file, I'm not sure what these companies need, you can upload them online and have a 3D object printed out for you rather than having to buy your own 3D printer. So again, this is a partnership between Home Depot and MakerBot. Remember, I said, and I'm sticking to this, I've said by Christmas this year, you're going to see $300 3D printers in the stores. We're close. There are $300 3D printers available, by the way. There's a Kickstart, oh gosh, I can't even think what the name it's called. There's a 3D printer available right now from a Kickstart company that is a $300 3D printer.
So in essence, you've really actually made it. You've actually succeeded in...
But it's not in the store. I'm saying it's going to show up at Target or Toys R Us. This Christmas, I'm telling you.
So that we can call it Ducharme's Law? It's like kind of like Moore's Law?
That's right.
Ducharme's Law, $300 3D printers.
I said this Christmas.
Talk to Dirk if it doesn't work out. Okay.
That's right.
Well, also in the news this week, the International Organization for Standardization recently announced that the draft international standard, the DIS, of the ISO 9001 standard is now available for public comment. Now, as many of you know, our revision of ISO 9001 is due for release next year, and this opening of the ballot for this stage is an important milestone in that process. So anyone in the world, from you or me or academics, those in industry, consumers, regulators, or anyone else, can now review the DIS and submit their opinions to the committee framing the 2015 version of ISO 9001. To do so, simply contact the ISO member in your nation. For those of us here in the United States, of course, that would be the American National Standards Institute. For more information, you can find them online at www.ansi.org or email questions relating to the DIS to isot@ansi.org.
ISO T.
ISOT, ISOT at ansi.org, and you can email them, and you can check out their website as well for information about how you can get a hold of the DIS and comment accordingly.
And we encourage you to do that. I mean, ISO 9000 is pretty ubiquitous among industries. Pretty ubiquitous, is that actually makes sense?
Close enough. Sure, why not?
And you should participate in the process. I mean, they do read the comments. We know several people who are involved on the technical advisory group for ISO 9001, and they do look at these comments. They do want to know what your feelings are on the standard. So be sure to contact them.
Yep.
All right. So, are corporations missing out on tremendous opportunities when they lack women on their boards and in other senior leadership roles? Well, according to MIT Sloan professor Thomas Malone, the head of MIT Sloan School of Management's Center for Collective Intelligence, the answer is yes. Malone's research shows that the collective intelligence, and we'll get to what that means in a second, of a group rises when there are women involved in that group. And this topic is discussed in this week's story, Corporate Boards Miss Out When They Don't Include Women. So, collective intelligence. What is it, and why do women have such an impact on it? Well, according to Wikipedia, kind of a condensed version of it, collective intelligence is kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's the shared intelligence that comes out of the collective efforts, and we should add competition, of everybody in a group. And it's particularly important in consensus decision making. So it's kind of this knowledge base that comes out of everybody participating in the group, and kind of the sharing that goes on in the group. And of course, at the end, a board or any kind of leadership group has to make some sort of decisions, so it all also ties into this consensus decision making. Well, according to Malone, his group's research has showed that if there are more women in the group performed better. And he says, in general, says Malone, the higher the ratio of women to men, the better the performance. And the key, he says, is this collective intelligence. The collective intelligence, he says, is part of this is perceiving one another's emotions accurately. And this is also called, a high social intelligence, being able to understand people, kind of understanding body language, understanding, facial expression, kind of picking up those cues, those visual cues from a human being. Women are actually more socially perceptive at this. Are more socially perceptive, I should say, than men. They are actually more able to discern what someone is thinking through this body language, the facial expressions, and other type of human observation, according to Malone. So if you think about that, what they're saying is that this social observation is really important as part of the collective intelligence, because I think, and he doesn't really go into it here, but I think what he's saying is that part of the interaction of a group, and part of the importance of the interaction of a group, is picking up on these cues and knowing where to, knowing when to back off, knowing when to come in, kind of better able to further a conversation if you're able to understand that maybe somebody isn't saying something that they might want to say, kind of picking up those cues and not blowing past them. And here's the interesting bit. The more women in the group, the better, and that's according to Malone's research. He found that even a 50-50 split of women and men wasn't enough. The best performing groups were those that were actually mostly women.
Not surprising. I don't think. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot that's there. Some of it touches on gender issues, and some of it, touches on issues of stereotypes too, actually. I mean, this idea that men sometimes are the ones that are the natural leaders, because they're aggressive and they want to take the bull by the horns and do it. But in big organizations, I think this really applies to big organizations.
Sure.
You need a certain granularity of employees to make this really happen. But I think in today's, modern work environment, the sensitivity to that, to to what you say, the perceptions of what somebody's not saying and not doing, and that could be an employee, it could be a customer, whatever. Those softer skills are really, really important. I think that you can't successfully run a business if you aren't conscious of what's said and what's unsaid. And you know, again, not to get stereotypical, but I think women are better at it than men.
Well, and I would come at this also from a slightly different angle. I think, and this is my own perception from working with some women leaders in the past, is I think some women leaders try to lead like men.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where they meet a lot of resistance, because they're kind of giving up their skills that they have as a woman, and what they bring to the equation as a female leader. And when they try to lead like a man, number one, I think it comes off wrong. Mm-hmm. Just my own personal opinion. I think that's where you get a kind of like, oh, she's a bitchy manager, that type of thing. I think a lot of that, some of it's stereotyping, some of it I think is women giving up this skill that they have in order to lead like a man, which I think might be a mistake.
Well, it's not, and that's not just limited to women, it's a broader issue. It's like, I think anybody who takes on the mantle of C-level, C-suite leadership has that issue, where it's like, well, you got there doing things a certain way. And if you change the secret sauce that got you to where you are, and you try to say, well, now I'm the CEO, I've got to do this, it's going to probably be a problem.
It's probably going to be a problem.
So for whoever it is, men, women, whatever. I mean, you got to be who you are while you embody that new role. It's a tough. It's a tight line. It's a tightrope. It's tough.
And like you said, there's a lot of kind of social issues that go into this as well. So.
Absolutely.
So interesting. So put more women on your board.
There you go. That's the moral of the story. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about management now in my story. One of the stories that I wanted to cover on today's show. And this is from Trip Babbitt, who's a frequent contributor of ours. And the article ran actually in yesterday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. And the name of the article was Demings Principles Today. And there it is. You can see it right there, pulled from our great website at www.qualitydigest.com.
In case you don't know where you're at.
In case you don't know where you're at. So Demings Principles Today, again, ran in yesterday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. And Babbitt sets up this article, this column, in a way that I always like, because he gives us something of a history lesson here. He talks about Japan's emergence as a global manufacturing superpower starting in the 1950s, following, of course, World War II. And what he's saying is that U.S. companies kind of had to respond to that in a certain way in the following decades, in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. And Deming, of course, helped to drive home that message. Deming was really the man on the scene at kind of both ends of this, if you think about it. Immediately following World War II, Deming as well as Durand both went over to Japan. I think the year was 1950, actually, 5 years after the war. And at that point, the Japanese industry was really still in shambles. And Deming as well as Durand had a series of meetings with, this is well known in the history of quality, a series of meetings with Japanese engineers and Japanese managers to really begin to set up things like SPC, Statistical Process Control, SQC, Statistical Quality Control, allow them to understand some of the underpinnings of quality and how they could improve. Well, one way that those organizations responded was to be vigilant in terms of their efficiency, right? I mean, the Japanese were very efficient competitors. And American organizations responded to that efficiency, I think, maybe rather excessively. The other part of Deming in this equation, as I said, he was at both ends of this, was of course, we always know, is the great NBC white paper, If Japan Can't, Why Can't We? We talk about it all the time. Which was more than 30 years ago.
Right, about 30 years ago.
35 years ago or so. But that was the point where the Japanese emergence was really complete, and America really wasn't competing. And Deming appeared on that white paper and began to say to American manufacturers, hey, you've got to do it this way. You've got to look at some of these underpinnings that I brought to Japan, which were really initially American inventions in the 50s, and you got to bring them back here. So I think what happened with that was there was an excessive focus in American companies on efficiency, right? And the myth, that some was a myth, was that the Japanese won and the Japanese succeeded because of their hyper efficiency. That's very true. They did well because they were extremely efficient competitors. But really what happened is that they were effective. Again, Babbitt in his article points out the difference between efficiency and effectiveness, and he says, you don't want to, in the words of Russell Ackoff, I think it was, you don't want to do the wrong things righter, right? I mean, and that's what efficiency is. I mean, if you think about it, what would you rather have? You would, I mean, I know what I would. I mean, I would rather be effective than efficient. I mean,
right.
if you're inefficient but effective, it's better than being effective but inefficient.
Right.
I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, no, it's true.
You want to be effective. Effectiveness is the key.
Yeah, you want to be effective because in the end, I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of a business goal,
right?
If effective means you're reaching your customer in the way they want to be reached,
right?
So in the end, you want to please your customer. So that's, to me, that's what I think of when I say effective.
Effective, right?
Yeah.
And that's what Babbitt's talking about too. Is that if you have the choice, you want to be effective rather than efficient. You want to be both.
You want to be both.
But
given a choice, you'd rather have happy customers.
Then even if you have inefficiencies in getting there,
right.
You want to get there. You don't want to efficiently get somewhere you don't want to be. That's the point that he's saying here. I didn't say that well, but that's the point he's getting to here. And I think that the broader perspective on this is this idea that Americans thought they were copying the Japanese efficiency there when they didn't get a chance to copy the Japanese effectiveness. That was the differentiator for the Japanese following the war, was that they understood markets, they understood customers, they understood the weakness of their competitors, and they understood that the game was to serve customers and to make money, to build business, right? It wasn't just to do things well. It's this old argument we have all the time about tools versus principles. I mean, tactics versus strategy. I mean, tactics and tools are great and you need them. You have to do them right. But if you don't know where you're going, if you don't have a broader vision for how to be effective in addressing the business end of the machine, which is to make money, satisfy customers, make money, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how efficient you are. And what Tripp is saying here, what Babbitt's saying in this article, is that we've had a proliferation of efficiency. And that wasn't ever what Deming was talking about. Deming was not an overly pedantic guy who was just going to say, well, work on these little tools here. I mean, he talked about culture, he talked about principles, but American manufacturers, American managers that he talked to in the 70s and 80s, distilled out of that this overconsciousness about efficiency, about tools. And I think that never was Deming's intention. Right. The moral of this story here is that you need to have a broader picture. You need to understand that whatever you're doing, you've got to do it well, sure, but you've got to get to a point where you can succeed, where you can win, where your company can be competitive and then be dominant in your space. And you do that through being effective at what you're doing, not necessarily being just efficient. Interesting. It's a simple message, but it's one that gets lost sometimes.
And I think just kind of an overview on this too is I think there are people who believe that maybe Deming's principles I guess Deming's principles don't really apply to today's business. In fact, I think there was a comment or two underneath underneath Tripp's article, kind of along those lines. But it depends, I think, on what they're talking about. If you're talking about actual principles, ideas, the concepts and stuff, I'm not sure they don't apply. Maybe the specifics, how you apply them, that may change, that may not apply anymore, but I think the idea behind what was motivating, I think a lot of what Deming was doing, probably still makes sense, even in today's world, 50 years later.
Mm-hmm. It's evergreen, it's principles. Yeah. Again, if you look at it from the perspective of principles, those are bedrock, those don't change. If you look at the tools, those are going to change, but the tools are less important. Right. You get to the principles and the culture first, and then you build the tools on top of that. And that gets conflated a lot of times, and I think that's the problem. People try to go, outside in rather than going inside out, and I think that's the mistake that's made many times in people who are trying to initiate a lean change, a lean culture change, is that you need to go inside out rather than outside in.
Yep. So speaking of tools, let's talk about leaders
and cars.
And cars. Is your leader a tool?
I am. I've been called that many times.
I haven't called that. I'm just a tool.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, in an article this week, Mike Figliolo, in his article, Taking a Ride on the Leadership Highway, Do You Lead Like You Drive? He's drawing some comparisons between how people drive and maybe how they lead. And he came up with this idea as he's driving, I think probably in LA. I'm going to guess that's where he was.
Wow.
And just kind of observing how people drive, and he kind of drew this connection. I like similes. I think this is really interesting. He does actually several similes here between management styles and leadership styles. So I'll go through a few of them here. One of them he mentions is you've got the short-sighted rusher. And we've all seen this guy, particularly if there's stop-and-go traffic. It's the guy who zooms right past you, only get held up by cars that were clearly moving slowly ahead of him in his lane. And then when another opening appears, he zooms off in that lane. So you got these guys who are like, traffic's moving at like 5 miles an hour, and they get over into this lane, and they scoot forward like, 50 feet. And now they're, 2 car lengths ahead of you, and then you slowly creep past them by staying in the same lane, and then they cut back. And we all know that guy. The leadership analogy, says Figliolo, is kind of like chasing after the nearest opportunity for improvement, but not seeing the bigger picture of where things are headed. And it feels like you make a lot of progress because, hey, I just changed direction and we just moved forward. But you never seem to really get ahead. Figliolo says that you need to try patience and take a longer view of things. Sometimes you just stay the course, and you don't do all this zigzagging, because in the end, sometimes all that zigzagging is eating up resources. Think of it as gas and blood pressure, and it's not getting you anywhere. Sometimes it's taking the longer view, setting your course, and sticking with it. Then there is the reckless speeder, and we also have all seen this guy. You see him coming in your rearview mirror. We've all seen this guy, and it's the guy, he's usually, I should say, in a little small, sporty little car, zipping back and forth, just like cutting across 3 lanes, going like, 20 miles an hour faster than the speed limit. Then he cuts back another 3 lanes, and he's basically driving like a maniac. In leadership, this is like the guy who pushes himself and his teams at an incredible pace, and he just doesn't let up. Now, that sounds awesome. We like the idea of, pushing the team, and to a certain extent, you need that. But eventually, if you're pushing too hard and your focus is only on the project or the goal, you end up ticking everybody off because you're taking too many risks, and sometimes you're making people bad, and it's happening because it's all about you. So the idea is that you've got to take the focus off yourself. It's important to push your team, but you don't want to push them in a way that is negative. I mean, there's a positive way to push. There's a positive way to move forward, even move forward quickly, while having your team alongside of you doing it because they want to be. Okay, now the opposite side of this is the slow and steady guy. This is the guy who goes strictly by the book. He stays right at the speed limit. He takes his exits nice and slow. Now, all of this is probably a good thing while you're driving. I actually don't mind these people. I mean, I get a little bothered with it, but hey, if the guy is going the speed limit, he's going the speed limit. I mean, what can I say, right? But in business, you have to take some risks. And while you don't want to do anything illegal, you do want to stretch your team. You need to step outside the line sometimes in order to have a more interesting and innovative team. I mean, you don't want to constantly be so on the straight and narrow that you're not accomplishing. I mean, number one is boring. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I've worked for companies like that, and it's boring. I mean, you're moving ahead, yeah, you're getting something accomplished, but it's like drudgery, and you feel like you can't step out the lines to innovate or do anything like that, right? So you need to be able to stretch your team. Finally, Figliolo finishes up with the road rager. And I don't think I even need to explain what that means in terms of leadership. You already know who I mean. We're talking about the screamer, the bully. Oh yeah, you're a screamer, man. About the screamer, the bully. Yeah, exactly. Something doesn't go their way, and they immediately just go off the deep end, and again, doesn't accomplish anything other than alienating your team. By the way, everybody knows it's just a human trait. When you start to alienate people, when they start to dig in their feet, particularly in a workplace, that's when you start getting your passive aggressive behavior. Mm-hmm. They won't do anything wrong, but they're certainly going to drag their feet, and they're not going to go where you want them to go with any kind of speed, because you've ticked them off. You've got your team to a point where they really don't want to work with you. They'll do it because they have to, but it's going to be drudgery for you and them. You don't want that. I came up with a few of my own.
Oh, you did?
Actually, a couple.
Oh, good, okay.
Well, there's the tailgater.
Okay.
Now, the tailgater is that guy who's always on your rear end. You know, you're in traffic no matter what. This guy just comes up behind you. Even if you're doing 80 and a 65, the guy comes up behind you and sits like 3 inches off your bumper, right?
Yeah.
To me, this is kind of like, what would you call it? A micromanager, right? This is somebody who's like, you have your job, you're doing your job, you're going the direction you want to go, but that person is like always on your rear end, right? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants a micromanager. Of course, something we can all relate to today is the texter or the distracted driver.
Oh, the texter.
Yeah, they're so busy looking at what they're doing
that
they're not paying attention really to where they're going or where the team is going. They get so involved maybe in the minutia, or maybe even into their day-to-day operations, that they forget that they're a leader, and they forget that their goal is to lead, and they have to look up and look at the traffic and go, oh yeah, guys, by the way, we need to be. A leader can't be, even if what they're doing might seem to be good, you know, and maybe the actions that they're taking and so forth, as part of their function of a team is good. If they're not leading, it doesn't work. They have to look up and drive.
Yep.
So there you go. Some interesting. Next time you're driving in traffic, you can just think of all those things.
How about the backseat driver? That's a good one too. You know, you think about that. I mean,
there is the back. Maybe the backseat driver is more like the micromanager. If you think about it.
I mean, it's like you know, you're like,
why aren't you doing it this way? If I were you, I would do it that way.
Well, you drive. You know,
sure. Let me lead for a while.
Well, you know, this all reminds me of George Carlin's great quote. You know, he said that anybody who's not driving the exact same speed as you is a jerk. He didn't use the word jerk, but he said, look at that jerk, he's driving too fast. Look at that jerk, he's driving too slow. You know, it's like, you got to drive the same exact speed as you, they're okay. So
just the way I'm driving.
Great story by Michael Neal.
Okay, well, we've got a subtle tweet of the week this week. I'm not sure we've quite figured it out, but let's throw it up there.
Yeah.
This cracks me up for some reason. I can't believe I am at 9,999 tweets. I do have a life.
I would argue that maybe.
Well, I know.
I would say
it depends on your perspective.
I would say yes. Maybe you have a life in your screen.
Well, that's right. I have an online life.
I have an online life.
Your kids may not know who you are, but I've got an online life.
Who is that guy?
It's like, but he's got 9,999 tweets.
Well,
that's awesome.
Were we his 10,000th right there? Did we just push
Dave? Put him over the top.
We just pushed Dave Foy over. Dave, congratulations.
All right,
well
buddy.
done. Well done, buddy.
Out, man.
You're at 10 grand. You can put down the Twitter now.
Say hello to your wife.
That's right. Thank you.
Introduce yourself to your kids.
You know, if you have a tweet that you want to tweet at us, your 10,000th or your first, we're at Quality Digest at Twitter, right? Twitter at Quality Digest? No, Quality Digest at Twitter. Yeah, at Quality Digest. Whatever.
Yeah, there it is. Twitter at Quality Digest.
Twitter at Quality Digest.
Just got to read the screen.
Just read the script, right there. Mike. Don't try to drive. Don't try to be a backseat driver. Okay. Well, that's our show for this week. But before we go, we'd like to offer thanks to today's sponsor, Hexagon Metrology. Hexagon Metrology is committed to helping you control your processes, enhance the quality of your products, and increase efficiencies. They empower you to stay one step ahead of a changing world with their wide range of product offerings, nearly 200 years of expertise, and an extensive support network. Hexagon Metrology, where quality comes together. For more information, just click on the banner ad just below or just to the right of this video player screen.
That's right. And hey, next week, we are going to be at the CMSC show, the Coordinate Metrology Systems Conference in lovely, and I'm sure warm and humid, North Charleston, South Carolina. And we'll be there as usual, taking a look at the latest in large-scale 3D metrology, and we'll be doing a couple of interviews. Probably going to be checking in some more on the measurement zone,
and the testing they've been doing.
Measurement certification, personal certification for metrologists. We'll have an update on that for you when we come back.
Yeah, next week on the show. You're here on your own on the show next week.
Next Friday, right?
You'll have some clips from the show that you can from CMSC that you can show off.
And we have a guest also.
We have a guest, Alexander Lane of ETQ as well. It's going to be talking about an upcoming webinar. So good show next week. Look out for that, and a great week of Quality Digest Daily coming up on Monday as well. So check that out. And in the meantime, Have a great weekend, and we'll see you then.
So long.
All right, bye.
Deming